So games are too expensive these days for everyone. Dude, we talk about this all the time. Um, I've talked about this really from my own sentiments, from my own point of view. Um, Ever since I've started doing these video gaming news segments, I've said that I feel like one of the biggest, if not the biggest, obstacle for people being able to get into the world of video games and enjoy the world that I love is price. And we talk about it a lot. And we'll have a bit of a discussion here after I read this. But video games are too expensive to develop and have to sell for too high a price. We can't keep this up for much longer. Now, there's an issue that goes along with this statement. We've read here recently that, again, AAA games are breaking the $1 billion budget price point now. There are games that are getting AAA price, AAA games that are reaching the budget of breaking that $1 billion threshold. Even the ones that aren't breaking the $1 billion threshold, they've got to be hitting half of that at least. So you're talking, 500 million on a budget for a single title, where you're going to be talking probably 300 million. Just cut it in half, 50-50, whatever. 250 for the actual development of the game, and they usually go about 50-50, to where the other half is all marketing. And so we've hit this predicament where it's like there's that much money being put into the development of these games. So again, like I was stating earlier, we hit this point recently where they're like, well, we need to raise the prices of games, and they wanted to blame it on inflation, which was really a load of crap. It really wasn't. It's because they're putting so much money into the development of these games now, but the quality's not there either. So we're paying more for these games that they're putting more money into the budget for, and then we've got all these games, these AAA games that come out, and are just a big pile of crap too. So it doesn't make any sense. It's not adding up. Now, not that there aren't AAA developers that are doing good things, but there's a lot of them that are not hitting the mark either. So it's a really bad situation, aside from the fact that there's enough other monetization crap going on in the industry that really going from 60 to 70 bucks at a AAA price point just for a base edition of a game off the shelf on release wasn't really necessary. There's enough other scummy monetization stuff going on in the industry that wasn't needed. But we'll get to that. Everyone would agree that games are too expensive now. When I say everyone, I mean everyone. Whether it's indie developers trying to scrape together the cash to stay afloat, major studios attempting to push the envelope, publishers trying to make a profit, regular gamers staring at their wallets, games cost too much money. This is an issue I think about a lot. So there were two news stories over the past weekend which caught my eye. The first was that CMA Activision Microsoft merger report claimed AAA projects can have budgets that go into the billions. And now, obviously, what we're talking about there are the top echelon of AAA games, right? I mean, we're talking about like the GTA 6 stuff and Call of Duty stuff, right? So not all AAA games, but I guarantee you, if the top of the top AAA games are hitting over $1 billion budget, they're breaking that threshold, that a lot of the other AAA games are probably hitting at least half that much. So you're talking $500 million for a single project, single game project, right, in the AAA realm of gaming development. The second was that the $70 price point is putting a lot of players off buying new games. Yeah. Together, these two stories paint a picture of an unstable future. The CMA report is basing this off of publisher claims claims rather than listed budgets. Easy to believe this will be the case in the future, if it's not already. CD Projekt Red spent $316 million on making Cyberpunk. And that's before you account for its astronomical marketing. So, $316 million apparently was just for the development of the game, not for the marketing of the game itself either. So, and this just goes back to what I was talking about before. You've got developers spending over $300 million just on the development of the game, and it's a pile of trash. If you cannot remember or didn't know, Cyberpunk is one of the greatest modern examples of a horrible, horrible, horrible release. This should have never been released when it got released. It was just absolutely nightmare fuel. It's like a game that couldn't even hardly be played at 316 million into the development. Modern Call of Duty games cost around the same. The Callisto Protocol, considered to be a mid-tier AAA game, had development cost of 162 million. Genshin Impact's ongoing development and support totals around 500 million. One unnamed studio in the CMA report had a development budget of 660 million with a marketing cost of almost 550 million. This is another one of those things where it's like they are putting not a whole lot less money into just the marketing side of, I mean, they're almost matching. I mean, it's 100 million less, yes, but they're not far off from matching it, just what they're putting into the development of the game itself, into actually marketing it as well. For those making them, games are just too expensive. Now, look, let's take a second to talk about the difference here about something too, right? Okay, you talk about a game like Call of Duty, which Call of Duty games come out fairly often. So if you're talking about every Call of Duty game is getting set with a budget of triple-digit million, that's a lot of investment in a game that is having a new iteration hit every 2 years, probably, something like that at least. As opposed to something like Genshin Impact, right? Genshin Impact has been very, very successful too, but this is a game that is live service, right? So there's a bit of a difference here that needs to be taken into account. I'm not dumbing down the fact that there's been a lot of money put into the development of Genshin Impact at all, but there is a difference in between a game that has had this much put into it as a title that has been. When did Genshin release, dude? 2021. So 2 years now, and it's a live service game. They continue to push out new content for it. So obviously, the cost of development is going to continue to increase, right? But I don't think that it's going to escalate due to having the base of the game there, as opposed to having to start from scratch almost every single time with something like Call of Duty, right? So there might be a little bit of a difference there to take into an account with games that are just popping off every year and a half to 2 years from scratch in a development process, as opposed to something that's been around, is live service, and the base of it's there. They're just adding some new content in and promoting that on occasion. It might not be a stark difference really, but it could be a difference overall too. Just something to point out. We wouldn't really know unless we got numbers about something like Call of Duty over the past and the future, and how much each one of those has cost to develop, and what Genshin Impact's cost to develop. It keeps ramping up to be moving forward. One unnamed studio in the CMA report had a development budget of 660 million with a marketing cost of almost 550 million. For those making them, games are just too expensive. As for players, it's unsurprising that the increased price point is putting them off. It's near impossible to factor what a game is worth compared to what they were sold for 20 years ago, because you don't just look at inflation, but also wage stagnation, the changing demographic of gamers, the increase in technology, the difference in narrative and graphical quality, the longer play times, but also the rise in patches, broken launches. Microtransactions, online subscriptions, the whole media landscape has changed. It's impossible to compare a video game released today to a video game released in the 90s. They're a different species. In the 80s, you'd go to the cinema and see Star Wars. In the 2020s, it's the MCU. That's a fairly consistent media market. Gaming has changed far more drastically. This is not to argue that 70 price point is fair. If it doesn't make sense for your audience, then it's not fair. That's the bottom line here. I only mean you can crunch the numbers however you like and determine that $70 is too low, too high, or just right. Usually, it's whichever answer you already thought. What are the chances? Studios and publishers can point to these increased budgets and offer a defense of the $70 price, along with often stuffing their games with pointless filler that adds hours into the playtime but ultimately makes the game worse. Yep. There are times when these high development prices seem worth it. Everyone just goes about their lives. It has already been a decade since the last GTA game. The next one is still years away, with just Red Dead Redemption 2 in the middle. Naughty Dog released The Last of Us a decade ago, and in the time since has only brought out Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us Part 2 as fully fledged releases, as well as some remasters, expansions, or spin-offs and collections. Of course, to say only feels insulting. GTA 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, The Last of Us, Uncharted 4, and The Last of Us Part 2 would all be contenders for the top 10 games released since 2013. Let's not forget The Last of Us Part 1 and how absolutely awful that is on PC right now. Studios are taking their time, spending a lot of cash, but they're making masterpieces. Sometimes. Except most of them aren't. We are seeing games be delayed for months, even years, have huge budgets, be sold at full price, still end up pretty average at best. Yeah. The Callisto Protocol, with 162 million thrown at it, scored a disappointing 70 on Metacritic. Did not meet sales expectations. Gotham Knights, arriving 9 years after developer WB Montreal's last game, and with heavy marketing, not to mention the obvious cost for its franchise, scored a near unheard of score for AAA games at 64 and flopped commercially. Yo, you know what else is hitting a 64 right now that we looked at already this morning? Redfall. Redfall currently on Metacritic is sitting at a 64 on Xbox and a 62 on PC. Yep. The stars do not seem aligned for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League either. This game looks disgusting, actually. Talking about a game they want full price on release, and then it's riddled with microtransactions, battle pass crap. It's been delayed numerous times. I mean, you name it. It's not looking very good. It doesn't matter with these games that these games aren't as good as Red Dead Redemption 2, or at least it shouldn't. When their costs run to 9 figures and they have development cycles that mean they take longer than medical school, they kind of need to be. Modern game development means every studio is always seeking to make a masterpiece. It's always paying for it. It's always charging for it. Even in a medium where the critics are generous with perfect scores, yeah, they often fall short. They've already paid for it, so they're still going to charge you for it. Here's the crux of the issue. When I was a kid, my favorite games were Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, and Tomb Raider. I got a new game from all of them every year, from 96 to 2003. Tomb Raider had one game every year, 2 in the year 2000. It then took a 3-year break and came with my favorite game in the series and went on another run of 3 games in 3 years. Crash went back to back, 96 through 98. Spyro had a decade-long unbroken streak from 98 to 2008, although admittedly, they weren't all winners. I know some of these games, even the great ones, don't hold up today. When they brought back Crash and Spyro for remasters, they had to pack the trilogy together so they added up to a reasonable playtime for modern audiences. As I mentioned above, the audience is very different. Length used to come from challenging difficulty. Now it comes from easy filler. Yeah. The fact remains that gaming used to be able to produce major hits and rewarding experiences for much cheaper, still leave its audience satisfied. Now we're made to wait 5 years or more between series. Not all the time, Assassin's Creed. there's still series that be just popping off nonstop, which to me is also a huge turnoff. I think there's a balance between it. I don't want to wait a excessive amount of time, but there's also something to be said for allowing me to get hyped in between games too. then drop $70 for them. Studios have charged us that much because it costs them $700 million to make and market. Things can't keep going this way. It's just too expensive. Yeah, I mean, this is a very well written article. Yo, Stacey Henley, from The Gamer, great article by the way. I really like that article, and I agree with the majority of it, to a great extent actually. And I think most of us do. We talk about this in this channel a lot, in the news segment especially. Um, it's I think really what it's like. There's a number of things that contribute to these bad situations, and let's be, not all AAA developers are doing a terrible job. I feel like Capcom is one of those developers that's stayed pretty good on their stuff. We still see them, like, they're remaking the RE games. They're doing a solid job at that. Monster Hunter, all that. They're. I'm missing a lot of stuff for Capcom, but just to name a few things, they come out with some pretty good content. And they don't normally have like a whole lot of performance issues or anything. And again, there might be a few little buggy things on release from time to time, but they get them patched out pretty quick. And that's another thing right there that I harp on a lot, is I think that obviously game development has had to change a lot, right? Because gaming has evolved to a great extent. We want to compare things to the way gaming used to be, but it's hard to do that in large part, right? I mean, games have gotten huge. Expectations from us as gamers in what we want to see in games, and the immersion and everything is massive. And so I think to an extent we've driven developers sometimes to these lengths of how much they feel like they need to be putting into the games. But at the same time, there are these issues of, like, I talk about certain things like relying on connectivity, right? Of being able to patch games. They rely on connectivity and the internet as like a crutch, instead of the way games used to be addressed as, you wouldn't really be able to touch the game after it was developed and released. It had to be pretty, I mean, it had to be really, really, really polished. A game did on release after development. You weren't going to be able to go back and touch that game. You couldn't really, not a lot of people had connectivity back in the early days of gaming. So, unfortunately, what's happened is it's turned into this mindset, it seems, from developers in regards to like things of that nature, where it's like, instead of using it as a useful tool and going, okay, we'll be able to use this to push out new content and maybe address some unforeseen issues that might pop up, they use it as a crutch. And they go, well, we know the game's not ready. We didn't test it enough, whatever. But we're going to push it out anyways. People are still going to buy it anyways. And then we'll just, we'll do the best we can with patches and things like that. That's not acceptable, man. That's not the way things should be done. So we talk about a lot of this kind of stuff, and ultimately, no. I mean, they wanted to keep trying to tell us that inflation was the reason for games increasing in price. Man, I don't. They're the ones that have gotten, these. And let's take another company for example, in Tango. Tango Gameworks, man. They probably are right now. Got the game of the year under their belt. There's a lot of the year left, but Hi-Fi Rush is probably game of the year right now. And you're talking about a AAA developer that shadow dropped a game without really any marketing ramp up for it at all. We didn't even know this game was coming. They dropped it at a $30 price point, which is less than half of what most AAA developers are dropping their games at nowadays. And so I think that, Tango really at the beginning of this year showed a lot of these other AAA developers and us as video game enthusiasts that It doesn't have to be done that way. It doesn't, and I think I would say that a lot of these other AAA developers, even putting these big budgets into the games and the games turning out to be big piles of garbage, is actually showing us more that it doesn't work that well, you know? And we've seen time and time again that, like, I'm actually more scared of a game that gets hyped up that has a huge marketing budget underneath it. Those are the ones that I'm like, I'm usually a lot more skeptical about the ones that I just see a ton of content about. The ones that I just see being promoted all the time, I'm like, those are the ones that really get me scared. And I'm like, why are they promoting this so hard? Other than the fact that it's probably not going to follow through. you know, that's the way I've gotten. I mean, I'm jaded, of course, because there have been so many times where it's happened. But I mean, historically, there's a big trend of that happening, right? Where games get really really hyped up and they're supposed to follow through with a great experience, and in one way or another they don't. And I think that I'm not the only one in that the situation of looking at these games that get marketed super heavily and go, that's a bit concerning. I they get marketed and hyped up so much that it's almost unrealistic for them to live up to the expectations, It's a very well written article, though. I like this a lot, and they really point out a lot of the great things that are. I mean, I say this all the time. This is why I promote free content all the time. Unfortunately, for the console market, for console gamers, it's much harder for you to get your hands on free content. But I promote free content all the time, free games all the time in this channel. Even if you're not a PC gamer, just going and setting up an Epic Game account, because they give away free games every single week, I promote people doing that, just because who knows, if even though you might not be a PC gamer right now, you might become a PC gamer in the future. And if you decide to do that, if you had already been logging in every single week and grabbing your 1 to 2 free games from Epic Games, you could have a huge library of games to play. So, I mean, and all it takes is a few minutes of time every week. It's nothing. It doesn't cost anything. So price is a huge obstacle. I promote sales and free content as often as I can, because I do feel like that, in this world that I love, obviously the world of video games, the world that we all love, that we all hang out here and talk about this stuff. I don't feel like it should be taken for granted whenever you can get this free content. And even if it seems like something you might not be really interested in diving into, who knows, whenever you might end up seeing it later on and go, I'm kind of bored. That looks interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. You'll have it. It was free. It's not like you had to pay for it. So who knows? Yeah, absolutely, Tinwin. I agree. Good article. Good article. Thank you, Stacey Henley.